Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Marx and Engels, who are communist philosophers. So, Mark Engels was born on November 28th, 1820, in the city of Barmen, Prussia. His parents were Protestants. In contrast, Marx was born later in 1824 in the city of Trier, Prussia. And I just realized that I need to go in here and change something. That's better. Okay, so moving on. Marx studied at the University of Bonn and the University of Berlin, and he was a member of a group of individuals called the Young Hegelians, who had formed a school of they had formed a school of thought around Hegel, basically. And Ingalls learned to be a businessman, in the city of Bremen after being pressured to do so by his father. In 1841, a philosopher named Ludwig Feuerbach published a pamphlet book type thing called The Essence of Christianity, where he claimed that basically Christianity is false, and man made up a god for his own glory. And Hege- the young Hegelians ate this up without hesitation. Marx eventually got a degree from the University of Vienna in April, and Marx's philosophy began to form as he took concepts from Hegel and Feuerbach and put them together. Engels was also introduced to the young Hegelians, and he eventually declared himself an atheist and briefly served in the Prussian military. Marx began to contribute to a magazine he created, and the Prussian government disfavored this magazine. So, yeah. From 1842 to 1884, Engels lived in Manchester as a businessman, and he worked on communist causes during his off time. He married a woman named Mary Burns. In June 1843, Marx married a woman named Jenny von hang on, Westphalen. Jenny von Westphalen. And here I have another typo. This is supposed to be Belgian. Belgian. There we go. So Marx and Jenny did some moving around, and they lived in Paris. And Marx met Engels while he was writing for a different magazine he had created. And Marx wrote something called Toward the Critique of the Hegelian Philosophy of Right. And it's where the religion is the opium of the people quote comes from. In 1845, Engels published The Condition of the Working Class in England. And the Prussian government somehow got Marx exiled from France, even though Marx was not living in Prussia. So Marx moved to Brussels and Engels followed him. Marx declared that he is no longer a Prussian, and Marx and Engels, seeing as they had very similar, if not identical, perspectives, they put their heads together and produced something called the Holy Family, which was a critique of a professor that Marx had had in college. And they later started working on a different piece of writing called the German Ideology, which explains their materialist view of history. The German ideology was finished in 1846, but it was not published until 1932, which was just around the time new era, a different era of German history was beginning. In 1847, Marx and Engels join a secret society which is called the League of the Just, based in London, and eventually it becomes the Communist League. Marx and Engels work on the Communist Manifesto. The League grows impatient, but when they see the Communist Manifesto, they are amazed. Then, in 1848, food shortages trigger another round of liberal revolutions in Europe. This time, the revolutions are a little more successful. A Republican government is declared in France, which takes Marx in before the Belgian government can exile him. A German parliament is formed in Frankfurt, and Marx returns home to the Rhineland, now living in the city of Cologne. He begins to call for cooperation between the workers and the more liberal leaning members of the, that's it's Burgeroid. Ugh, it's the fancy word they use for noblemen or capitalists or whoever's against the workers, whoever's mooching off the workers. That's the word they use. The Communist Manifesto is published, but in the wake of these revolutions, Engels decides that they should put it away, and Marx agrees. The Communist League is then dissolved. And in November 1848, the King of Prussia disestablishes the Prussian parliament. Marx is banished from Prussia again because he had been arrested on a couple of different charges, most notably for propagating the idea of not paying taxes, which is a bit ironic. So, from May 17th to July 31st, 1849, Marx lives in Paris until he is exiled again and moves to London. He will not move again. In December 1849, that's August through December, Marx and Engels re-established the Communist League. And at this time, Marx and Engels kind of enter a quiet period, which lasts until 1864. Engels works at his family's law firm in Manchester and uses money earned from that to just sort of keep Marx afloat. And during this time, Marx is involved in the New York Tribune. He becomes a member of the First International's General Council, and Marx publishes the first part of Das Kapital, which is important for later. Then, in 1870, the Chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, wants a war between Germany and France because he's managed to unify Germany, and France is the next thing on his list. He changes the communications between France and Prussia in order to trick each other into wanting to go to war with the other. France mobilizes for the war first. As a result of Bismarck's trickery, Prussia believes that it is actually fighting a defensive war when it is fighting an offensive one. The First International believes the trick too. Germany wins the war. Prussian King William I is declared Emperor of Germany, creating the German Empire, which is the Second Reich. Germany then annexes a portion of France's eastern territory called Alsace-Lorraine. Engels moves the seat of power for the International from London to New York after Marx wins an argument against another group of communists in the International, led by this Russian fellow named, let's see, this name is pronounced Mikhail Alexeyevich Bakunin, which I may have partially butchered. Oh dear. Now based out of the now based out of Philadelphia, the International dissolves. So it moved from London to New York to Philadelphia, and now it's gone. And on March 14th, 1844, Marx dies of a lung problem. Engels goes on to finish the other two parts of Das Kapital before dying on August 5th, 1895. He finishes the other two parts, so it's three parts that make one book. Then we have a couple of other just sort of anecdotes. The German ideology is not published until 1932, long while after the Russian Revolution and the formation of the first communist state. The Nazis start to burn Marx's books, where a phrase associated with that is against class struggle and materialism. Remember that Marx was a materialist. He did not believe in any god. So this says against class struggle and materialism, for national community and an idealistic lifestyle. And then in 1939, the Nazis pull a trick very similar to what Otto von Bismarck did, where Hitler has Nazi soldiers pose as Polish soldiers and attack a radio tower near the German Polish border in order to trick the citizens of the Third Reich that they are fighting a defensive war rather than an offensive one. Hopefully, not as many people fell for that as Bismarck's trick. And finally, a very interesting incident that happened in 1953. A small number of pro communist books in US controlled libraries located in the cities of Singapore, Sydney, and Tokyo, which are all kind of in the same vast general area. They are burned. They are flat out burned by aides of the infamous US Senator Joseph McCarthy. Basically, McCarthy Americans burned communist books too. This was not a Nazi exclusive phenomenon. So, did the Nazis link Judaism and communism together because of Marx? That was done more in relation to the Soviet Union. However, any copy of text written by Marx the Nazis could find, they burned it. So, Christianity and Marxism, allies or enemies? Um, Acts 2, verses 44 through 47 says, all who believed were together and all had things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the good will of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number of those who were being saved. work is a natural part of life. Adam worked in the garden before the fall. So Christianity and communism seem compatible, but they're not. Communism is something that only works in theory. You need to have a leader so morally pure that the only leader who could possibly lead a communist country would be Jesus. The comparison between Marxism and Christianity is that on the surface they look similar, but they are very different because Marxism is based around a materialist idea where the physical world is all that there is, while Christianity has a physical and immaterial world. And there are different ideas of equality and different ways that other religions and ideologies are judged under Christianity and communism. Under communism, it can be said that all men are equal, but some men are more equal to others, something that will be explored as we continue to go through this PowerPoint. So, the Communist Manifesto is a document created by Marx and Engels that serves as the backbone of communism as we know it. A manifesto is basically a document that describes an ideology. The Communist Manifesto, boiled down, just pretty much says this: all of history has been dominated by a conflict between two groups of people, the workers and the noblemen. The noblemen should be overthrown by the workers. There should not be private property, and working men of all countries unite. That is usually rendered and shortened as workers of the world unite. Das Capital helps establish some of Marx's ideology. Some of it comes from his other writings, but Marx did not believe in freedom as we do as Americans. For Marx, American freedom was something tied to the idea of freedom from things. That's that's true. We have freedom against bad actors who would want to infringe on our rights. But Marx claims that this idea is not freedom at all because it separates people from each other. Marx claims that freedom is found only under community via communism. Marx claims that the idea of community and possibly even the feeling of community we get from our peers based on our commonalities in things like nationality, religion are illusions. In summation, anything that is not communism, according to Marxism, is not real community. And this actually manages to explain why the Third Reich based its society, why, and that idea that anything that is not communism is not real community explains why the Third Reich, which based its society off of racial purity, that community is drawn out of racial purity, which, although is wrong, community based off of racial purity is wrong. It was also completely and vehemently against the Marxist idea of community only coming through communism, despite being just as evil and totalitarian. For Marx, the cause of society's ills was the social hierarchy, basically. Marx was not fully against liberal republics like the United States or France between 1848 and when Napoleon III became emperor. He apparently just thought that communism was better. And finally, Marx could not prove his theory of labor mathematically. The concept can be surmised like basically that if I have 5 hours to build a sleazy chair, and the manufacturer says it takes 5 hours, but it actually takes me 7. That means 2 hours are surplus. And this surplus leads to what Marx considers to be profit. And Marx also thinks that the cost of a product should be calculated solely from how much work it takes to make the product and like how much time it takes. But that's not true. If it takes 3 hours to make a computer, according to the manufacturer, and it also takes 3 hours to make a pencil, which is going to, and I have an additional surplus of 2 hours for each, which is going to cost more, the computer or the pencil? The computer is going to cost more because it's made of more expensive parts. It's not about labor. It's not only about labor. And Marx thought everything was about labor. This paradox is called the transformation problem. And while it has been solved, the ways of doing so are questionable. And then here we have a diagram of what a communist government is like. So, why does communism never work? Communism never works because it requires doing away with 5 standard American values: family, democracy, religion, property, and freedom in general. Of these 5, only democracy is not explicitly tied to Christianity. Communism expects us to give up these rights, these values, in service to our fellow workers and the almighty state. Marxism is about the state usurping God. And this is a recipe for complete disaster. These values are not values that people willingly give up, which means that if a nation wants to become communist, they will have to take those values away by force. That is what that's just how the cookie crumbles. And the problem of running a communist country is that, in theory, a communist nation should be an ideal place to live, where everyone is basically of the same equal middle class. In fact, it's basically all of it's middle class, and the government takes care of everything. But when you have a government that takes care of everything, it's incredibly easy for a malevolent individual like Stalin to go in, take over the government, kill all the dissenters, and establish a totalitarian dictatorship. So on the left, you can see a communist government. I'm not sure if that is exactly the government of the USSR, but it demonstrates the important fact that under a communist government, all of the power is concentrated in one area. Meanwhile, in America, our government is divided into 3 branches, each of which has special privileges so that no one branch has all of the power. And here is the fun part. This is our last slide, and I would be a bit remiss if I did not talk about the many, many novels that exist highlighting the danger of Marxism, usually by taking the ideas of Marxism to the extreme. So, Animal Farm, we'll just go from left to right. Animal Farm is a novel that is not a dystopian novel. It's not a dystopian tale. It's more of a allegorical fairy tale about the Russian Revolution. And Animal Farm is famous for, number one, it shows how communist revolutions against oppressive governments ultimately replace one tyrannical government with the other. And it is famous for a quote from the end of the book. I can go find it. That says, All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, which here I have adapted into what it really means that in a human context, it means all men are equal, but some men are more equal than others. And a bit of funny trivia is that actually, if you think about it, that is an example of textbook doublethink, a concept that Orwell created in his other book, 1984, which isn't on this list of books because the world of 1984 is more fascist than Marxist, but doublethink is just believing two contradictory ideas at once. Um, Continuing from left to right, we have A Wrinkle in Time. Part of that book takes place on a planet that is controlled by a single evil intelligence that is basically in control of an entire society where everyone is part of identical families that live in identical houses with identical red rubber balls, and it's a lot of sameness. It's sameness everywhere, and it's all controlled by this one special person. I mean, yeah, I guess they're a person, and they have control over an entire civilization that has been robbed of its free will. We is a piece of dystopian fiction set in a future where Earth is ruled by a single planet wide totalitarian government, where privacy, individuality, and even names no longer exist, which is a predecessor to the more well known book, Anthem, which takes place in a future where individuality no longer exists. Unlike We, though, which is set in a somewhat futuristic society, the dystopia that Anthem takes place in has regressed technologically to a level roughly corresponding with the 18th century or even Europe during the Middle Ages. And when the main character reinvents the light bulb and goes to show it to a group of scientists, instead of being celebrated, he is ridiculed for going against government regulation. So basically, the idea is that when you have a communist government, they go and regulate everything, which is true. It's regulation so regulated that it's hard to have new ideas. Maybe let me rephrase that. It's so regulated that it's hard. It's just hard. So that's it. You can also look at the end notes in the bibliography. So next week we will be looking at a step sort of away from Marx into a new, well, I shouldn't say new, a different individual named Nietzsche, I think is how you pronounce him. So we will look at him next week. Bye.